Revive.
Hello, and welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we explore the intersections of horror film and feminism. This is Anna, co-founder of the Final Girls and your podcast host. Over the next few months, we'll be tracing the lineage of female monsters in horror cinema. In each episode, I'll be joined by a special guest to dive deep into a monster movie. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing a lady zombie double bill of Brian Yuzna films, both full of gore, decapitations, and sassy bat creatures. To kick off, we'll be covering Bride of Re-Animator, the sequel to the cult classic where Herbert West and Dan Kane build a she-monster with the heart of one's long-gone girlfriend. And in the second half of the episode, we'll be discussing Return of the Living Dead 3, a little-known but well-loved entry into the zombie franchise which centers on a teenager who uses an army chemical to revive his dead girlfriend after a motorcycle accident. A zombie Romeo and Juliet, if you will. I'm joined in this episode by friend of the Final Girls and podcaster extraordinaire Becky Dark to discuss both of the films in detail. And as per usual, if you're spoiler phobic, we will be giving away the films from pretty much the beginning of the episode. So without further ado, let's get our zombie on. Becky, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, the last time we chatted, it was about the terrifying Zoom horror host, but yeah, it's nice to be back on the kind of the mainstream, as it were, and talking about female monsters.
I know, and as you mentioned our chat about a host, I literally tried to remember when that was and I couldn't because my brain has melted.
Oh yeah, yes, no, mine is I'm pretty sure my brain is literally sweating along with my balls, like my eyebrows, my eyebrow, like everything.
Eyebrows, eyeballs, brain,
if I manage
soul
to string
is sweating.
more than one sentence together for this, it will be nothing short of a miracle. It is hot, lady.
So let's dive straight into our lady zombie double bill.
Yes.
So let's start with The Bride of Re-Animator.
Herbert West is not just your ordinary doctor.
Others dare not dream what we are about to do.
He intends to make medical history.
This is no longer about just reanimating the dead.
With the help of Daniel Kane
It's never gonna work. She's gonna be uncontrollably spastic.
and a few select friends.
West took my body, but he cannot take my mind.
He's about to bring his dream to life.
And God created woman.
Someone old,
What's dead is dead, Lieutenant.
someone new,
It is some kind of joke, right, man?
How dare you judge my work?
someone borrowed,
Who is she?
someone blue.
This morbid doodling with human body parts. Is this what it's all about?
Something so shocking, it must be true.
There is my creation.
Make a note of it, Dan!
Rejects.
Daniel! You're coming! You made me!
I made you! Forget it, Dan. She's just an assembly of dead tissue.
H.P. Lovecraft's Bride of Re-Animator.
Are we having fun yet?
Had you seen this film before?
I had, yeah. I'd seen both of the films that we're going to chat about because I am a big Stuart Gordon and Brian Yuzna fan. So I love this kind of era of sort of extreme body horror, 80s, like high stylized but like amazing effects led, super gory, oozy. I mean, it's very, very much my jam. So yeah, I'm a big fan of both of these films, actually.
Excellent. So let's put this into context of the Re-Animator film series. What do you think of it, first of all, kind of as a sequel, as a direct sequel to the first Re-Animator, which was directed by Stuart Gordon, and this one, in turn, is directed by Brian Yuzna?
I personally think it works really well as a sequel. So, huge fan of Re-Animator, directed by Stuart Gordon, the late great. And Bride of Re-Animator comes in, it's like 8 months after, so it really is one of these films that picks up where the previous film left off. So you get the Miskatonic massacre that happens in the first film, and the dean and his daughter, you know, getting killed, and all of the other kind of casualties and all of the chaos that ensues. And then we basically pick up with Herbert and Dan 8 months later, and they are in the midst of a Peruvian civil war, where they have kind of fled and are now kind of using that situation of the casualties of war for Herbert to kind of progress his research and his experiments into, you know, reanimation. So yeah, for me, you know, as the film goes on, and we kind of follow the guys as they go back. Herbert determined to kind of carry on with his schemes and his research. Dan becoming more reluctant. You know, he's already lost like the love of his life. But Herbert really kind of uses that manipulatively to bring Dan back into it, and to make sure that he continues to kind of assist and lend his expertise to the experiments. And yeah, I think sequel wise it carries on very nicely, and in terms of like the story, but then it also takes a step up in some of the effects and the way that the bodies are kind of used, and Herbert's kind of like the rejects that they call them, and the way that he's kind of becoming slightly more unhinged, more kind of playful with stuff. Yeah, what do you think?
I came to the Re-Animator series late, but I am a big fan of Lovecraft, and I really enjoy the series. I'm as you are. I'm a fan of that particular Brian Yuzna, Stuart Gordon brand of body horror, and which is kind of in a time capsule state as well, kind of in the 80s, 90s, and Stuart Gordon in particular kind of has a series of Lovecraft adaptations under his belt. Not all of them massively successful in my opinion, but I just love that they kind of create images and creatures that are just mad looking and kind of nightmarish, but also realistic to a degree, but also kind of comical. Like, they're never scary. The ideas behind the films I find scary, but the effects themselves are kind of fun. You know, they're kind of fun type of gore that I think is quite unique to them as filmmakers. And it's very take it or leave it. You're either into it or you're not. Kind of, it's not the sort of, might not be for everyone. This is the sort of stuff that if my parents caught me watching by myself in my room, they'd be like, where did we go wrong? Which did happen.
Really? Which film?
Oh, it was probably Return of the Living Dead 3, to be honest.
Probably. Amazing.
I wanted to pick up on something really interesting that you mentioned, which is kind of, how do you think this relationship between Dan and Herbert evolves in this film? Because I find their dynamic really interesting.
Yeah, I do as well. And you know, in Re-Animator, Dan is always the he's kind of the straight man to Herbert's, you know, kind of more manic scientist. Always a little lower key. He's the kind of, you know, he's the romantic one involved with Meg, the dean's daughter, and he's just a little more kind of, I don't know, treading the straight and narrow, I suppose, whereas Herbert is, you know, this manic creature who is very like singularly minded and focused on his science and his ego as well, kind of proving other doctors wrong, and, you know, making sure that Dr. Hill kind of is not only knows that Herbert is kind of contemptuous of him, but that he was almost punished for not agreeing with Herbert's, you know, way of thinking. And that dynamic continues in the sequel. But I find the relationship more manipulative upon Herbert's side in Bride, because Dan is, I think he shows elements of kind of suffering from, you know, PTSD, and, you know, he's obviously grieving, and he is fixated on this new patient who is sort of terminally ill, and she, of course, then kind of goes on to become the main part of this kind of reanimation of Meg, Dan's lost love. And really, Herbert uses not only their friendship and their bond, but the feelings that he knows that Dan had for Meg, and his kind of ongoing grief for her, to really make sure that he doesn't really have a way out. Every single time Dan tries to throw his hands up and say, like, I'm not interested in this, you know, you're mad, you're going too far, I'm out of here, Herbert kind of pulls him back. And there is, I think, you know, we talk about Herbert being very single-minded and focused about the science, and I think that is a big part of it. But I also think that he literally doesn't really have anybody else. If Dan were to leave, I don't think it's solely that Herbert would find the science difficult to do on his own. I think it's that he would, you know, he'd miss him. Like, he would be literally kind of on his own, surrounded by these bizarre creations. And I wonder if there is a part of I talked about, you know, this idea of him becoming more unhinged and becoming more kind of experimental in terms of the creatures that he's bringing back to life. And I wonder if part of that comes from this feeling that he can feel that he's not going to be able to hold on to Dan for ever, or for really much longer, and so he's almost sort of creating himself like this weird menagerie to kind of fill in for, you know, the other human connection that he just genuinely doesn't have.
I love that reading of it. I completely did not read it that way, but I prefer yours. I'd like to give Herbert a bit more humanity. I wanted to move on to the bride herself, and I found it really interesting, kind of both as a sequel, but also, well, I mean, it's a sequel that's also drawing on some of the stories in the original Lovecraft stories, which was serialized, so it was published kind of chapter by chapter in a magazine, but also kind of as a direct lift, or definitely very inspired by The Bride of Frankenstein, the 1930s film by James Whale. How do you think the film updates and glorifies that take on The Bride, which is a almost purely cinematic creation, and one of the original and at least most iconic female monsters?
Yeah, and I mean, you use the word gore there, and I think that has got to be, I mean, as well as being, you know, this trademark really of the films that Gordon and Yuzna made together, that's got to be, for me, the key updating of the Bride of Frankenstein to Bride of Re-Animator. The effects around that scene where Herbert is talking through the different parts that they have used for the creation, the ballerina's legs and the prostitutes. I don't think he even uses the word prostitutes. He calls it like a night walker or something. You know, he's just, Herbert has so little regard for the women in this film. But saying that, I don't think that comes from necessarily a misogynistic place or a sexist place. I think his disregard is for humanity rather than for women, you know.
Yeah.
So the fact that he focuses so much on the fact that these women were sex workers, or they didn't have enough regard for their own bodies, or you know, just the way that he uses his delivery of that scene can be read as he's sort of almost like romantically sort of talking his way through and almost trying to sell it to Dan of like, you know, we're giving these women and these parts of these women like a second chance rather than them going to waste. But I just, it's almost like that Tom Cruise thing where he's all smiles and charm, but there's like nothing behind the eyes. So as he is talking through that and trying to be so empathetic, you just know that it's like it's all fake. And so the fact that the parts of these dead women that they have created, the bride, the fact that they are a ballerina and a sex worker and a lawyer, it doesn't really mean anything to him. But as viewers, you can kind of see the kind of pathos behind that, if that makes sense.
I definitely didn't read any inherent misogyny into Herbert's character. Like you said, he just is kind of does not care about any human being. His sort of separation and kind of complete misanthropy is so intense that it really doesn't matter whether they're women. He just has no regard for human beings, because I think he just, you know, in that scene that you're talking about, he just cares about how they can serve his scientific purpose, the way that kind of I read it. And it's interesting because like the fact that, you know, it's all supposedly to reanimate Meg, and that the kind of the final key piece is her heart. I don't think it carries as much value for him as it does for Dan in this film, because he's not. You know, he's mourning his dead girlfriend, and you know, this heart is kind of a romantic idea of the fact that her personality, her soul, her memories might be contained in this organ. And for Herbert, it's like, yeah, that's another bit. I'm missing that bit, so put that bit in there. That's the bit I'm missing. Oh, I also need a head. So who's that lady that you were developing a relationship with that was really lovely and sweet, and she was on her dying bed? Yep, chop that head off, pop it on. Sounds good. It'll work. That'll do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like it's like
100%. And the thing about it being Meg's heart, like this is what I mean about him being so manipulative. And you know, his whole theory that he was up against Dr. Hill about is about like the person's kind of soul, or like being, not only being in the brain and in the head, but you know, being kind of throughout the body. And I honestly believe that, you know, he sees the heart as, okay, well, this is a way that I can keep Dan with me, I can keep him involved in our experiments, but also it's the way that I can kind of finally prove this thesis of mine and prove people like Dr. Hill wrong. Because if we can reanimate this this kind of bride creature, then if Dan can kind of see Meg in that creature, then it's proven my scientific thesis. So again, you know, I don't think that he's got any emotional stock at all in the fact that the heart belong to Meg. I think he sees it just literally as like a tool to his own ends.
That's a very good point.
The actual design of the bride is, you know, he's kind of pulling on her tendons, like exposed tendons, to kind of curl her fingers, and the rib cage is just held together with kind of metal bars, you know, and it looks very, I don't know, like they've just kind of, it looks much more roughshod, like they have just kind of cobbled this thing together, whereas back with Bride of Frankenstein there is still that air of, even though she's got some exposed stitches and things, there's still really that air of glamour to her. And even today, you know, around Halloween, the Bride of Frankenstein is definitely one of those Halloween costumes that that women may gravitate towards, because it's kind of an authentic, like, horror character, and so iconic, but also it means that you don't have to necessarily like look super scary or gross, whereas Bride of Re-Animator really leans into that grossness and the extremity of really kind of what this process would be like.
Yes. I think I love the design of her, because she looks like, exactly like you said, like an actually reanimated being that's made out of different corpses that don't exactly fit together. But she still really reminded me of kind of, you know, the design of the Bride of Frankenstein, but obviously much less demure, much less glamorous. You know, the bride in the 1930s film, it still needs to look beautiful and not really monstrous. This is a pure monster. But she's so, and you know, there's bits, I don't know if you notice them as well, or maybe I might be just projecting because I'm just watching all of these films and like every single iteration of a Frankenstein screen adaptation. But she had these things, like the hair was sort of this like puffed up hair that was not quite similar to the bride's, but sort of like in that vein.
No, absolutely.
Like her dress, even though it was sort of sheer plastic, it's kind of had like a white tinge, so it was very, like, it was transparent, you could see everything, but it still kind of had like that bride veil-y vibe to it.
Absolutely.
That the 30s film mostly had.
The material that they chose for that kind of covering, I think, is remarkable, because it looks, okay, stay with me, Anna.
Yes.
To me, it looks like if you have like band-aids or plasters, you know, you have the little kind of cottony bit in the middle that actually goes over the cut, and then over the top of that, then there's this little like see-through bit. It basically looks like loads and loads of that. It's that kind of sheer, slightly crinkly material, and so it treads so many references. I think it's an amazing use of costume or set design, where it's medical, it's kind of bridal, because it's almost lacy, and it brings that that whiteness, you know, that calls back to Bride of Frankenstein, but also has that kind of medical feel to it. And then also your point about it being like see-through, so, you know, it's not demure, but I didn't feel that was in any way like a kind of sexy decision. It's not see-through so that you can kind of her breasts or anything like that. It's see-through so that you can see the gore and the parts of her. And, you know, I find it's much more of a kind of like effects decision rather than a kind of decision made around like titillating the audience. So yeah, I mean, I 100% agree that that's got to be a callback to the 1930s film, and I think that it's one that works on so many levels.
And there's even like a recreation of the famous line, you know, that she's alive, and which Dan tells her, he's like, "You're alive," and she repeats back, she speaks, which the bride in the 1930s one never did. She sort of screeches like she's not really capable of speech. But I wanted to ask you kind of, what do you make of the reanimation scene? So it comes very late in the film. It's almost at the end, but it's very prolonged because it's both when she is reanimated, it's Meg's heart, she wakes up, and then, you know, there's a confrontation and she dies. So what do you make of her short but very intense reanimated life?
I think it's really sad. Like it's a really tragic kind of short existence that she has, both for her, mainly for her, also for Dan, and also in a small way, I care less because he's, you know, horrible, but in a small way for Herbert, you know, there's a certain amount of kind of tragedy in the way that things play out for him as well. So, you know, for the bride, you're right, it is very prolonged. So it's, you know, they're really waiting for her to come back to life after they have injected the serum into her heart. So the way that works is they have to wait for the heart to kind of pump it around the rest of, you know, the circulatory system, I suppose. So they are waiting and waiting, and Herbert, in fact, has to go up and, you know, deal with what's going on upstairs while Dan stays with her and basically watches her come to life. And so he is the first person that she sees. And I don't know how you feel about this, and I'd be really interested to hear what you think, Anna, about whether you think that Meg does kind of come back into the body, because I don't personally feel that that's ever fully established, but either way, she comes back to life. She sees Dan. There's an obvious connection there. She is very afraid and confused and kind of disoriented and leaning very much on Dan and looking to him for guidance, for explanation, which he can't give a lot of. And then he kind of takes her up to show her to Herbert. And you get this really interesting exchange where she is afraid of him and clinging to Dan for kind of safety and comfort. And you get this look that kind of flashes across Herbert's face where he says, like, I made you. And he's almost, I don't know, insulted or disappointed or sad about the fact that she doesn't feel any kind of connection to him, and in fact is like pretty much kind of recoiling from him. And then with Francesca, who is Dan's kind of other love interest in the film, and all of the craziness that's going on with the zombie detective and the zombie detective's wife and all of the other reanimated corpses from the previous massacre that have kind of broken out from the hospital, then you're right, you know, it basically culminates in the bride in this chaos kind of saying, you know, making this decision of like, I don't know who I am, and if you don't want me, like to Dan, then I kind of don't want to exist. You know, I don't think he sees Meg in her. He's obviously got this existing relationship with Francesca, and as that dawns upon the bride, she essentially, you know, reaches into her heart, into her chest, and pulls her heart out. Like, I mean, it's a bit of a heavy-handed metaphor, but I
mean, it's very emo.
Yeah,
I so love it. It's so dramatic.
It's like, fine, well, if you don't want me, then fine. Well, I don't
just
even want to
my heart
exist.
out. Take my heart. And then obviously we get all the gory goodness where, you know, her neck sort of snaps in half and it bends backwards and stuff. It's delightful.
Yeah. Just coming back to this point about Meg, what do you read into it, Anna? Do you think that because they've used Meg's heart, there is an element of Meg in the bride?
I actually like the fact that we don't get a definitive answer, because I think that's kind of the point. I think it's kind of the point that we need to question it, because the idea is not whether they're able to reanimate Meg and, you know, return Meg's soul, because that then becomes almost a spiritual question as opposed to a scientific question. And the whole focus and kind of almost the protagonist / antagonist / you know, the point of view of the film is very much Herbert's, and he's not a spiritual or humanist character. He cares about the science. He cares to prove a point. So like we were talking about before, I think the film deems the answer to that question irrelevant because it is irrelevant for Herbert. So we can imagine for hours whether her look or her attachment to Dan when she's reanimated is because it's Meg or because it is essentially a newborn creature who is imprinting on and attaching themselves to the first human they encounter. And I found the reanimation scene to be very sweet, and in the way that Dan kind of coddles her and is very tender to her and is very gentle and kind of helping her essentially wake up to life. And this is not Meg, this is not his patient, this is not a particular person, it's an entirely new being. And, you know, you can read the fact that maybe it is Meg because of the way that she reacts, and maybe it's because in the same way as, you know, the monster in Frankenstein, in the Mary Shelley tale, or in the way that the bride, you know, reacts to essentially being created for the monster, as in, what is the point of me? I don't understand. I was not, and then I am. That's a massive existential question. I cannot deal with it right now. I'd just rather not be. So I think that's kind of also a throwback, potentially. Maybe throwback is not the right word. It's an homage, maybe, to The Bride of Frankenstein. But I think it also is the throwing back a lot more to Mary Shelley's ideas than maybe Lovecraft's, of the very human question of, even if I can, should I? And if you are the creation, where does that put you? Whose responsibility is to justify your life? Or maybe justify is the wrong word. Essentially, what are you if all of these different expectations are immediately placed on you? Herbert wants you as his science puppet. Dan is questioning whether you're his long lost girlfriend or not. And at one point she sort of rubs herself against him and he rejects her. And then you can see the rejection on her face. Yeah. And he's like, I don't want your body. You are literally a zombie woman. But there's this idea that maybe she feels like that's the purpose she's supposed to play. And that's not a purpose that she can play because Dan doesn't want her.
Yeah, and I think with Dan's reaction to her reanimation, I wonder if actually a lot of his warmth and kind of protection over her initially is because he hopes or thinks that there is that element of Meg that has come back with her reanimation, and as he kind of realizes perhaps that isn't the case, or even if it is the case, this realization that maybe I thought I wanted this but actually I don't, that rejection of her is really what kind of then just pulls everything out from under her, because I think she is portrayed to be quite willingly, okay, well, fine, so you've created me for you. Okay, well, here I am, and you seem to be nice and looking after me, so shall we do this for a while? And then he so quickly kind of 180s on it and rejects her just so totally that her only kind of reaction in her very extreme newborn confused state is, okay, fine, well, if this is why you've created me and actually that isn't a possibility, then I'll just uncreate myself. And that's when she kind of pulls the life literally out of her chest.
I love that expression you used, uncreate myself. It's so fitting. And to wrap up the conversation around Bride of Re-Animator, we've spoken a lot about Herbert, about Dan, about the bride. What do you think of all of the monstrous bit in general? I've sort of put it in my notes as the ending as the monster mash, because it's literally a whole bunch of little monsters mashed together like a very weird stew of human bits.
It's literally the best visual representation of a monster mash than I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't think of a better description. I mean, this is what I really come to Stuart Gordon, Brian Yuzna for, these creatures and creations. So heading up the effects on this film is Screaming Mad George, who also worked with Yuzna on, those bizarre, surreal creations in society. And Screaming Mad George doesn't work alone, but he was kind of, I think, one of the main creative visionaries behind the rejects in this one. And you've literally got people who are sewn kind of back to front, like a sort of push me pull you situation. You get like the dog, so the dog with the dog who has like a human arm kind of sewn onto its missing leg, and then like that is just
oh my god,
that poor animal. And then there's a head that is just sewn directly onto the top of a leg, which looks like some kind of weird like Japanese those amazing like Japanese kind of ghost spirits, like it looks like something like that. You've got things that have then got like other bits of animals like bird heads, and then I mean Hill with the bat wings, unbelievable.
I love this. I love it when he just his little head with the bat wings flies out of the delivery package.
It's so and like the first glimpse you get of it is like the shadow across the wall, like it's so well done. And in fact, back in the like pathology lab at the hospital, when the other doctor initially cuts the so he tries to reanimate the bat, then realizes, well, that was a mistake because now it's attacking me, and then manages to kind of get it back onto the table, and then brutally just cuts its wings off, like, which is just such a, again, it's almost like an equivalent to what happens to the bride, because they've brought her back to life. Here she is. Okay, I'm here. All right, well, essentially, I'm going to cut your wings off by saying, well, you're here. Great. Well, I don't actually want you. It's like a little kind of foreshadow to that for me. I just thought that poor bat, it was dead. It was fine. Okay, fine. So it was dead, but it didn't know anything about it. And now you've basically just brought it back to life, and you don't like what it's become. So you're just going to chop its wings off. Like, Oh, just amazing stuff. I'm very into it.
What a way to round out the discussion about Bride of Re-Animator. We move on to another zombie film with much less animal cruelty.
Yes, but no less cruelty.
True. We're going to talk next about Return of the Living Dead 3 from 1993.
They vowed to stay together forever, that their love would never die. But their pledge remained untested.
Oh, cool. No problem. I'm the boss's son, remember?
Until they went looking for a thrill. And stumbled on the chilling fact.
Let's proceed.
That even the dead can go on living.
It came back to life. We gotta get out of here.
And tonight, fate will put their promises to the test.
Oh my God.
Now that she's dead, he's frightened to live without her. But bringing her back is terrifying.
Oh, God, Kurt, that was incredible. Let's do it again.
Contain it, damn it! Seal it off now!
Is that what I'm gonna become?
These poor dead bastards crave brains.
She bit me.
She gave you something bad.
It feels so hungry.
Never find you down here. What have you done?
If she attacks him, he becomes like her.
I just get a little confused sometimes.
Love never dies.
We'd both mentioned that we'd seen this film before. What's your relationship with the film?
So I've got a slightly topsy-turvy relationship with the Return of the Living Dead movies. So
I'm curious.
when I was younger, my dad and I used to watch like Friday night horror. So my parents were divorced and it was like Friday night was dad night. And so we used to watch a lot of horror films. And one of our regulars, we either used to get it regularly from the video shop, or it was one that kind of made its way to the flat from the video shop and just never quite made its way back. But either way, it was definitely in one of those kind of oversized boxes with the like slightly photocopied cover. And that was Return of the Living Dead Part 2, which I loved and just devoured it, watched it over and over and over again when I was pretty young. I loved that kind of mix of really gory, zombie, gooey, gruey, kind of comedy horror. When I grew up and, you know, my horror addiction showed no sign of waning and suddenly had way more access, because I'd always loved number 2, I sought out Return of the Living Dead pretty soon and again loved it. You know, the kind of the effects in it are amazing, and you know there are so many. That was one that had so many kind of iconic set pieces that I had seen and then finally saw the movie to find out kind of how they all fit together. I loved, you know, the fashion and the music and that the whole aesthetic of the Return of the Living Dead movies is very much my jam. And then with 3, I actually came to it pretty late. So I saw it for the first time maybe last year or the year before, and then I have rewatched it for this chat. So I've seen it twice. So yeah, big fan of the franchise, but a relatively new kind of introduction.
Interesting. So what did you make of it?
I really like it, and in fact I enjoyed it more on second watch than I did on first watch, so I'm really happy about that it wasn't kind of like I love it when you revisit something that the first time you're like yeah, and then you know you come back and you can kind of get a different appreciation for it. I don't know, I was able to concentrate on it a little more this time. I found the pacing better in this watching. I think the first time I saw it, I thought it was a bit slow, but actually I was watching it this time. I was like, this is zipping along, you know. So yeah, I like it a lot, and the lead character of Julie, who it really kind of revolves around, and her transformation, her death, and her being brought back to life, and the kind of zombie transformation, I think works really well. I like it. How about you?
Well, we've spoken about this before. I have a weird relationship with this film where I didn't actually know it was a film when I first saw it. Well, it actually, I mean, I'm piecing together memories now. Yeah. So I didn't actually know it was a film because I saw it when I was a teenager. The first kind of time I remember seeing these images was in the very early days of YouTube, which I was, you know, a massive fan of, you know, way back when, you know, there was like web series with emo kids crying to the camera. That was very much my shit. And there was a lot of kind of fan-made videos for music. And I was really into this band called Jack of Jill as a teenager.
Amazing.
And, you know, it's like, it's very kind of gothy music. And I was listening to it through videos on YouTube. And I found this one montage of what I then later on, years later, realized was a montage, basically taking all the Julie scenes from Return of the Living Dead 3 and putting them to this really gothy punk music that I was into. I was like, wow, this is a great video. It was not. But then I realized that actually when I did seek out the film and I watched it, I realized that I'd actually seen it before. It was probably one of my earliest horror films that I'd seen that my cousin showed me when I was maybe like 9. Because he used to show me a lot of his sort of horror VHSs. I remember very vividly being shown Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and 2. But then I remembered watching quite a lot of sort of zombie ones. And they're all mishmashed together, monster mashed together in my memories. But I definitely remember, again, kind of the image of Julie. Yeah. It was one of those films that in my head I had almost made up until Michael Blythe programmed it for his series at the BFI. And I was like, no fucking way is this going to be screened on the NFT screens. And wait, this is a real ass movie? I can't believe I'm gonna get to see it. And how much firstly, of this did I make up?
This isn't a Jack Off Jill music video, and secondly, this isn't like some weird 9-year-old fever dream of mine. What? I love it.
Exactly. Can you imagine my absolute joy at sitting in NFT 2? I remember where I was sitting in NFT 2, front row, being like, I didn't imagine this. There's nothing wrong with me.
I love it so much.
I did seek out the original Jack of Jill mix, which I sent to you.
Yeah, you sent it through to me. I know. A joy.
Holds up.
It was one of those random questions where we were like chatting about the film, and then you kind of like the next message I got was, do you know Jack Off Jill? And I was like, wow, that, I mean, I can kind of see the themes here, but that really went off on a tangent quickly. And then I was like, oh no, wait, no, she knows something. What is this? What has she sent me? What a joy.
This is what being friends with me is like. You'll just get random messages in the middle of the day like, are you familiar with the early noughties punk band Jack Off Jill? Let me talk to you about this random subject.
The answer will likely be yes. And honestly, you know, these are the reasons I love you so dearly, Anna. Come on.
Oh my God. But going back to the film, one of the things that I find curious about this film is that it's pretty much like a zombie Romeo and Juliet, except for it's interesting that for a change it's actually the girl that's the kind of the from the wrong side of the tracks, and it's sort of a rich polite boy who's madly in love with her and kind of ready to give everything away. So what do you make of Julie and Curtis as kind of our lead characters in this?
Well, again, I think this is stuff that has kind of, like, I'm glad that I gave it a second watch because, and you can tell me as I kind of talk about it if you think I'm just it's like, no, Becky, rein it in. You're seriously overthinking this. But so
I would never say that.
So I love Julie. I'm a really big fan, and I love the way the film presents her as like this quite troubled, in some ways, this sort of troubled teen. You know, immediately we meet her, she's got this flame red hair, and you know, she's all fishnets and biker jacket and kind of denim hot pants and stuff. So she is given very much this image of this kind of sexy but hard kind of teen girl, as you say, sort of wrong side of the tracks. But the first thing that we get from her is, you know, she's doing this kind of classic thing of like holding her hand over the top of the flame on the lighter. But I think we soon kind of realised that, you know, that isn't just a bravado thing that she's been doing to show off in front of her friends. Like, she does seem to have this this kind of infatuation almost with like pain and death and kind of the darker side of things. So, you know, she's very keen to go and see what Curtis's dad is working on in this kind of military lab. And when they get there and they realize that it's some pretty dark shit and, you know, they are reanimating corpses, she's just, well, it's a bad pun really, but she's like animated by it. Like, you know, it kind of really gets her going, and in quite a sexy way as well. Like she's always like really passionately kissing him, and then when they are having sex back at his place later, like they've kind of just finished and already she's like talking about like, oh my God, but did you see that corpse? And like, were you hearing its screams and stuff? So she's very much presented as this this kind of morbid obsessed kind of teenager.
She's got like almost a death fetish.
Bit of a death fetish, yeah, exactly. And almost a bit of a death wish. So, you know, they are riding around on motorbikes and she is just so kind of like carefree, but so sort of, I don't know, she just doesn't, like, she just gives zero shits. And so she's literally like kind of grabbing his balls and stuff, like while he's trying to control the bike and sort of saying, you know, calm down. And she's like, I'll never calm down again. You know, she's kind of like so, again, manic and kind of over the top. And I think that a lot of the time when, not being a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist in any way, Anna, just to reassure you that I have literally no medical qualifications.
Between us, there is 0 doctors in the room.
Perfect. Exactly how I always love to discuss medical matters. But she's, you know, there is this thing about like troubled teens kind of having these death wishes and having this kind of just carelessness and disrespect of life, I think, because, you know, they may have found themselves in a position where actually they are so nihilistic that, you know, they just don't have too much to, like, not too much to live for. But we definitely get this impression that she doesn't have a strong respect for kind of safety and life, right? And then you get Curtis, who's he's beautiful for starters. Like he's you know, this sort of just like absolute kind of quintessential, you know, 91210, you know, floppy haired.
By the way, can we just make sure that it is known that Julie is played by Melinda Clarke, who is Seth Cohen's mother from the OC. I just gotta say it. Wait, no, she's Marissa's mom. She's Marissa's mom.
I was like,
oh my God.
Well, because there's like weird stepbrother stuff. I was like, oh shit, wait, is it Marissa and Seth?
No, that was my mistake.
She's Marissa's mum. Yeah. And again, in that, she's always like, oh, fucking throwing back the vodkas, and, you know, she's a bit like Marissa. Like, Marissa's another example of these sort of troubled teens.
I think it's this like hot bad girl trope that Drew Barrymore established with her knockout performance in 1992's Poison Ivy, which came out just a year before this.
Oh my god.
Also the fashion, the oversized leather jacket. Like I will go to my grave defending that film because it is just chef's kiss. It's amazing.
I think that Drew Barrymore in that movie is probably my ultimate style icon. Like if I could walk around with that like blonde perm and those round sunglasses and the oversized denim jackets literally at all time, I would basically just be the happiest woman ever. So yeah, strong link that you've drawn there. I love it. But so this relationship that they've got, like they're so kind of passionately in love with each other, and you know, like Curtis's dad's like really disrespectful to her, and like he won't even look at her, he won't speak to her, and Kurt is basically, you know, he's willing to basically give up everything, so he's not moving away with his dad. He's like, no, we'll run away together, we'll go to Seattle and I'll be a drummer in a band because it's the early 90s and grunge is a thing and that's what everybody was doing, right?
Sweet summer child.
What I found interesting on this viewing and what I find a little bit unsettling is that as the film goes on, the way that he speaks to her and the sorts of phrases that he uses are like, I found made me feel like really uneasy. So he sort of says things to her like, you know, she's sort of pleading to him to let her go, you know, to let her sort of die. And he's like, no, if we stay together, we can get through this. You're all that I've got. And he's essentially sort of made this choice because he was unwilling to let her go. And this sort of incredible choice, like over her body, she was dead and he's chosen to bring her back. And she is now having to live with the consequences of this choice that he's kind of made about her without her. There was just points about it throughout the film where he will say stuff to her, like, you know, he then calls her disgusting and then goes back and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, like I didn't mean it, I just want you to be the way you were. And I don't know, there's just like this kind of possessiveness and almost this like emotionally abusive way that he speaks to her so that he can, I don't know, kind of get what he wants. I feel like it takes quite a lot of the film for him to finally realise, like, oh, it literally is in the last couple of scenes where he's like, oh shit, like what have I done? And he's so motivated, I think, by his needs rather than hers. And I don't know, yeah, I don't love it.
I think you're very right in the fact that he does make this choice for both of them, and then he controls and is also then disgusted by the reanimated version of Julie, especially as, you know, and I really want to discuss kind of her transformation because he reanimates her minutes after she dies. So she's pretty much, she looks exactly the same. She's had no time to sort of, you know, be dead, decompose. And, you know, they establish it pretty early on in the film that kind of that's how the best zombies are made. You know, the quicker and the less damaged the body is, the kind of the more they retain of their personality, their cognitive abilities, their motor skills, all of that. Like they're just better zombies.
Especially if you're trying to turn them into bioweapons, you know, that's what you want.
Yeah. But she, you know, she's not human and he kind of does not get it. He's also, you know, again, overthinking central, but he's also projecting a lot of his own mummy issues onto Julie. Yeah. So he's not been able to let go or deal with his mother's death. So he's like, I cannot lose another important woman in my life. So it's up until the point where he actually understands the consequences of that and how important it is for him to let go, that he sort of finds peace. But it has to be forced, and it has to be forced through Julie going through a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of brings us to the conversation of, what do you think of Julie as a zombie?
I find the use of kind of self-harm and her kind of causing herself pain really, really fascinating. This idea that she is not only like struggling with like numbness, but also that she has to kind of distract herself from this like zombie hunger. So that the scene where they go into like the 7-Eleven or whatever it is, and she's like, I don't know what I want. I'm just hungry. I'm like, babe, I have been there. Like, I wanted to almost call my husband and like rewind it and be like, watch this. Who does this remind you of? Because I have shouted that at him in shops.
I've lost count of how many times I've said those exact same words. Relatable. Intensely relatable.
And she's just like pulling Twinkies and like crisps off of the shelves. I just loved it so much. But you know, then she finds out, oh no, it's human brains. That's the nummy treats. That's what I need. You know, no amount of like snowballs or whatever it is that she's eating is going to scratch that itch.
Tends to be a kebab for me. Like that'll do it.
Maybe like a Five Guys like cheese, like drippy cheeseburger,
double burger,
and a milkshake. Yes. Like that's sometimes
pickles.
Like that's
Oh, anyway.
Sorry, I went to my happy place then for a moment. Although I'm currently so hot, I don't think I'm ever going to be hungry again. So there is that. She starts to pretty quite early on, sort of in her zombie state. She has these pins on her incredible leather jacket. She's like pushing them into her skin, and she finds that this brings her this relief from the kind of gnawing hunger that she's got. And as the film and her transformation kind of progresses, she needs to step this up. So she is pushing pieces of glass like through her whole hand, and then when it comes to the point which she's kind of admitted to him, she's like, I'm never going to be the way that I used to. Like, I'm changed. I don't feel that way anymore, which sounds like a breakup, but obviously she's talking about, I don't feel human anymore. Like, I'm never, ever going to feel that way again. And she kind of locks herself in this boiler room, and we view this incredible kind of self, like, flagellation, I guess, but just kind of, she transforms herself, and it's so different from any other zombie transformation that I've seen, where, you know, you'll have a dead body and then maybe their eyes will open and they'll be a bit milky, and then as the film kind of, or the show continues, you know, they start to decompose, and you see the degradation through the kind of natural processes of death. With this, she has kind of discovered that causing herself this kind of physical pain with like spikes and chains, and, you know, really the kind of a lot of visual motifs of like rock music and kind of punk music and like biker gangs and stuff. By transforming herself, she's managed to kind of regain control, an element of control over her body. And so when she then emerges and we kind of pan up her body, she's got, you know, these cuts on her legs, and she's got like that rock kind of on a rope, like through her hand, and she's threaded a chain through her neck almost as a choker, and she's got spikes through her breasts and through her cheeks, and it's so extreme. But there's something, like, I think because we get this glimpse of Julie at the beginning of the film where, you know, that is kind of a personality trait that she's got to a certain extent. The film kind of earns it, and so by the time, you know, she emerges as this crazy spiky creature, it almost feels to me like she has taken some of that kind of control over her physicality back.
I love that point that you're making. She is, because she's not in control of her hunger, this like hunger for brains and flesh, and because also she was, you know, reanimated and is now forced into this new state of being outside of her control, this extreme self-harm, this extreme body modification is both a taking back of control, and it's a way of, you know, keeping her hunger at bay. Because one of the really tragic bits of this, of, you know, our protagonist being a zombie who is cognizant, is the idea that she knows that she doesn't want to hurt people. She doesn't want to eat anyone, but she also recognizes and feels pain and this intense, overwhelming hunger at all times. And being constantly in physical pain distracts her from the hunger. It's a really weird scene. Like, we watched it again for this episode. It's both very tragic and sort of filmed in a kind of titillating way, where, you know, she's sort of slinking out and, you know, her breasts are out and she's ripped her tights, and it's the way that she moves is very eroticized.
Yes, it is.
Which is very fucking weird.
And the camera angles as well, like it literally comes in like at her legs and kind of pans up the cuts that she's made in like her, and it's specifically like the insides of her thighs, so it kind of comes up like that area of her body, up her torso, where she's kind of torn open her clothes, and then, as you say, like to her breasts and stuff, she's moving in this like animalistic way, but not in a scary zombie way, in a like almost like a sort of exotic dance.
And there's this scene where she essentially eliminates this gang. You know, I don't think we have time to go into the problematics of those characters, but
mate, the race relations in this film, it's bad. Like, not only the Mexican gang, but also the use of Riverman, and the fact that his only role in this film is like classic black character sacrifice, just sacrifices himself so that the white characters can get away. It's really bad.
It's not great. Like, don't go into Return of the Living Dead 3 for any good or profound or even mildly appropriate takes on race or race relations in the States or anywhere. It's just bad.
It's very bad.
Yeah. But some of the gang members, particularly their leader, kind of really go up to her and then like, ooh, you know, we're gonna take you into that little boiler room in the tunnels.
He literally says something like, he sort of looks her up and down and he says something like, kinky, you look like my kind of bitch, and then like literally kind of drags her into the boiler room. It's
I mean, she does literally kill him seconds after.
It's wonderful, because not only does she just kind of kill him, Anna, she pulls his head kind of off and up out of his body, so it's just kind of dangling off of his spine out like the top of his body. Like, if you're gonna get revenge on somebody who is sleazing on you in a boiler room, that's the way to do it.
I mean, it's a very specific scenario, but yes, 100%. And also, this is, you know, we haven't mentioned this. This is also Brian Yuzna film. And Brian Yuzna loves his neck effects. He just loves extending and ripping apart creatures' necks.
Doesn't he, though?
He does. He does in Bride of Re-Animator.
And in Society as well. Like, there's so much. Well, I mean, not just necks. There's stretchy everything in Society. But yeah, I mean, you know, once you've realised that you can do something well, you just keep doing it.
The lesson of both of these films. To wrap up our conversation about both of them, it's interesting that they're both made by the same person. How do you think they make use of the female monster?
I think they both in slightly different ways, but in a lot of similar ways. They make excellent use of the kind of melancholia that can come along with the female monster. So in the end, the only way in both of these films that the monster can regain her agency and any kind of control over her afterlife. I was going to say any control over her life, but nope. Her undeadness is to basically destroy themselves. And you know, there's a lot of similar themes here about men creating these women for their own desires and then rejecting them when they realize that actually, you know, this isn't what I want after all. And I think they both do it really successfully. I think if you want a more in-depth exploration of kind of the female monster's development and the I guess the consequences of monstrousness being thrust upon women, then Return of the Living Dead 3 would be a great choice. I think, if anything, with Bride of Re-Animator, you just don't get enough Bride. You know, she's the reanimation sequence really does come right at the end. It's so much about Herbert and Dan and Francesca and the cop and all of that. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a misnomer to call it Bride of Re-Animator, because she's only in it for like sort of 4 or 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, well, like Bride of Frankenstein is literally in it for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah,
she doesn't even speak.
In that way, the homage, you know, it sort of is complete, isn't it? But yeah, I think both films really successfully deal with this idea of women have monstrousness thrust upon them, often by men, and often then find themselves in a position that men will step back and then suddenly regret their actions and therefore cast them aside.
Would you recommend contemporary fans seek these films out?
Yeah, I definitely would. So I think I'm a bigger fan of Bride of Re-Animator. I love it. I really, really enjoy it. And I think that it's an excellent companion piece to the first film, which is, you know, just such a classic. But I think that Bride, you know, deserves to kind of be up there in the conversation with the first. Return of the Living Dead 3, it's a little more hammy. It's definitely got some problems, but I think it's an interesting look at the zombie transformation, and as you say, you know, this idea of using Julie as this, she's brand new dead, and for her to then kind of to watch the zombie transformation on her body rather than in the more traditional way that we're used to in the zombie genre, I think is really worth it. And again, having it as a female protagonist in this kind of now slightly common zombie love story is great. And yeah, so I would definitely recommend both. And you know, Brian Yuzna, what a lad, right?
I mean, you can't go wrong with a man who loves
you can't go
breaking
wrong.
And extending and squishing necks so much.
All the neck.
Becky, thank you so much. It's always a treat, but thank you so much for your amazing insight on both of these films.
Oh, Anna, I mean, you know, anytime, you know that.
Just fawning over you over our Zoom. Where can people find out more about your work? What have you got happening?
What have I got happening? So I've been doing a little more writing during lockdown, which I'm really enjoying. So I've got I've got a piece on Society, actually talking about Brian Yuzna. I've recently joined forces with the amazing Zobo with a Shotgun, and she has very graciously let me join the team over at her website. So there's a piece on Society up there if you want to seek that out. Still working with the boys over at Film Busters, so still doing some reviews for them. And my podcasts, Don't Point That Horror at Me and Return to Erie, Indiana, are both still ongoing. Erie, Indiana, we've only got a couple of episodes of the show left to watch, but we do have some more kind of exciting interviews and guests coming on. And we're also going to be doing a discussion about Hocus Pocus at some point, that kind of Omri Cats. Find me on Twitter. I am at Bunny Dark. You can find it all there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Becky.
Thanks, Anna. This has been so much fun.
And that's it for this episode of the Final Girls podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. If you can, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It means a lot and it really helps. You can find out more about what we do on thefinalghost.co.uk and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Final Ghost UK. We also have a Patreon. If you're so inclined to support us, you can do that there. You can also follow Becky on Twitter at Bunny Dark, and I share a lot of TikToks of cats on Anna Be Demented. Thank you for listening, and next week we will be back with another double bill of 90s goodness.